The dust of the trail, a gritty film clinging to her worn dress and weary spirit, was Ilara's only constant companion on the final leg of the journey. Hope, a fragile bird, fluttered weakly in her chest as the stagecoach rumbled into Redstone Gulch. It was a raw, wind-scoured settlement, buildings hunched against a vast, indifferent sky, the mountains looming like jagged teeth in the distance. This was to be her new beginning, the place where Jedediah Thorne, her betrothed by carefully penned letters, awaited. She clutched her small, battered valise, its contents the sum of her worldly possessions, and peered out at the rough-hewn faces, searching for the one she had imagined for so many months. He stood near the raw timber of the assayer's office, taller than she expected, dressed in a suit that seemed too fine for the grit of the street. Jedediah Thorne. A cold knot formed in Ilara's stomach when his eyes, pale and sharp as ice shards, finally landed on her. There was no flicker of recognition, no welcoming smile she had rehearsed receiving 1,000 times. Only a slow, disdainful appraisal that made her skin crawl. "You are Ilara Vance?" His voice was clipped, devoid of warmth. She managed a small nod, her throat suddenly tight. "Mr. Thorne, I have arrived, as we arranged." The bird of hope in her chest stilled, then plummeted. He gave a short, derisive laugh that drew the attention of several passers-by. Loiterers on the boardwalk turned, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to open amusement. "Arranged? Madam, there appears to be a misunderstanding of a considerable magnitude." He took a deliberate step back, as if her very presence was a contagion. "I recall correspondence with a woman of refinement, of suitable prospects. You, forgive my bluntness, hardly fit that description." His gaze swept over her travel-stained attire, lingered on her tired face. Heat flooded Ilara's cheeks, a burning tide of shame and disbelief. "But your letters, you wrote of a home, of a life here." Her voice trembled, a mere whisper against the sudden, cruel silence of the street. She fumbled in her reticule for the packet of letters, proof of his promises, but his next words struck her like a physical blow. Those letters were perhaps optimistic explorations. "I have since made alternative arrangements more befitting my station." He waved a dismissive hand. "Redstone Gulch has little to offer a woman such as yourself. I suggest you take the next stagecoach back to wherever it is you crawled from." He turned then, a sharp, final movement, and strode towards the saloon, leaving her standing alone, the dust swirling around her ankles like mocking spirits. The valise slipped from her numb fingers, landing with a soft thud. Beaten, not by fists, but by words sharper than any blade, by a public humiliation that flayed her spirit raw, left behind. The faces of the onlookers blurred, some smirking, others indifferent. The promised haven had become a pillory. Tears welled, hot and stinging, but she fought them back. She would not give them the satisfaction. A man detached himself from the shadows of the general store's overhang. He was of middling height, broad-shouldered, his movements economical and quiet. His face was weathered, etched by sun and wind, and a deep-set sadness resided in his grey eyes. He wore faded denims and a work shirt, and a slight, almost imperceptible limp marked his gait as he approached, not her, but her fallen valise. He picked it up, his calloused hand surprisingly gentle on the worn leather. He didn't speak, merely held it out to her. Ilara stared at him, suspicion and a desperate, aching loneliness warring within her. Another judgment? Another dismissal? His gaze was steady, unreadable, yet held no malice. It was the absence of contempt that was most startling. He finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "Ma'am, it was not a question nor an accusation, just a simple acknowledgement." He gestured vaguely down the dusty track leading out of the main thoroughfare. "Storms brewin', not good to be caught out." She looked up at the sky. Dark clouds, unseen moments before in her distress, were indeed massing over the western peaks, mirroring the tempest in her soul. She had nowhere to go, no coin for passage, no strength left to plead. This man, this stranger, offered nothing but a stark observation, yet in it she sensed something other than the cold indifference of Redstone Gulch. Desperation, raw and biting, made her decision. She nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Without another word, he turned and began to walk, his limp unhurried. After a moment's hesitation, Ilara followed, a castaway clinging to the barest sliver of driftwood in a vast, hostile ocean. The wind began to whip at her skirts, carrying the first cold spatters of rain. The dwelling he led her to was little more than a cabin, nestled in a shallow dip of land some way from the town, small and sturdy against the encroaching wilderness. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a thin grey ribbon against the bruised sky. It was a solitary place, the silence broken only by the rising wind and the distant lowing of unseen cattle. There was an air of resilience about it, of having weathered many storms. He pushed open the rough-hewn door and stood aside, allowing her to enter. The interior was sparse but scrupulously clean. A stone hearth dominated one wall, a small fire already laid and burning weakly. A plank table and 2 stools, a narrow cot in one corner, and shelves holding a few essentials constituted the furnishings. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and a faint, indefinable scent of solitude. "You can take the cot," he said, his back to her as he added a log to the fire. Sparks flew upwards, briefly illuminating his craggy profile. "I'll manage by the hearth." Ilara stood uncertainly, her valise clutched before her like a shield. I have no way to pay you, mister." "Silas," he supplied, still not looking at her, "and I ain't asked for payment." He straightened, finally turning. His grey eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't name, understanding, perhaps, or a shared weariness. No one should be left like that. His simple words, devoid of pity yet full of an unexpected empathy, chipped away at the ice around her heart. She sank onto the edge of the cot, the exhaustion of the day, of many days, washing over her in a great wave. The promised life was ashes, but here, in this rough sanctuary, a different, unlooked-for kindness had found her. The storm broke then, rain lashing against the small window pane, the wind howling like a hungry wolf. But inside, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a fragile sense of safety began to take root. Days bled into weeks. A quiet rhythm established itself within the small cabin. Silas rose before dawn, tending to his few cattle and the small patch of land he worked. Ilara, after a period of numb inertia, found herself stirring, the ingrained habits of a lifetime compelling her to contribute. She swept the packed earth floor, mended Silas's worn shirts with neat, almost invisible stitches, and learned to coax a palatable meal from their meager stores. He never asked, never commented, but she would find an extra portion of dried beans left on the table or a piece of jerked venison when his hunting was successful. Conversation was sparse, like water in a desert. Silas was a man of few words, his thoughts kept close. Yet, in the shared silence, a different kind of communication grew. Ilara learned the cadence of his movements, the slight shift in his posture that indicated tiredness or satisfaction. He, in turn, seemed to observe her quiet industry, the way her hands, though unaccustomed to such rough work, grew steadier, more capable. She saw the lines of pain etched around his eyes when his limp was more pronounced, and he noticed the shadows that still haunted hers, the way she would sometimes stare into the fire, lost in a past he did not pry into. One evening, as a chill wind rattled the ill-fitting door, Ilara found her voice. The words came hesitantly at first, then in a steadier flow, recounting the hopeful journey, the cruel rejection, the utter desolation. She spoke not of Thorn's wealth or status, but of the betrayal of a promised future, the shattering of a simple dream of home and companionship. Silas listened, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, his silence an unwavering container for her grief. When she finished, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. He shifted, poked at the embers with a stick. "Some men," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual, "ain't worth the salt it'd take to cure their hides." He paused, then added, so quietly, she almost missed it. "Lost my wife and boy to the fever 5 years back. This land, it takes, but sometimes it gives too." It was the most he had ever shared. A small, precious offering of his own sorrow, a bridge built across the chasm of their separate pains. Ilara felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the shelter, but for this shared humanity. The trust between them, unspoken yet deeply felt, solidified like the earth after a soaking rain. The fragile normalcy they had cultivated was inevitably disturbed. Word of Ilara's presence at Silas's cabin seeped back to Redstone Gulch, carried on the sly whispers of a trapper who'd passed by, or perhaps a curious ranch hand from a neighboring spread. Gossip, ugly and insinuating, began to fester. When Silas went into town for supplies, he faced narrowed eyes and muttered comments. Thorn, Ilara learned through Silas's terse, reluctant report, had been making particularly venomous remarks, painting her as a woman of loose morals whom Silas had foolishly taken in. One afternoon, a stout, self-important woman named Martha Grigsby, who considered herself the moral arbiter of the sparse community beyond the town proper, rode up to the cabin. Her horse was as overfed as she was, and her expression was one of pursed disapproval. "Mr. Silas," she called out, not dismounting, her voice carrying an edge of authority. Ilara, who had been tending a small, struggling herb patch near the door, straightened, her heart sinking. Silas emerged from the lean-to where he repaired his tack. He moved with that same deliberate calm, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mistress Grigsby." "There's talk, Mr. Silas," she declared, her gaze flicking dismissively towards Ilara. "Unseemly talk. About this arrangement." Ilara felt the familiar burn of shame, but this time, a spark of anger mixed with it. She had done nothing wrong, had sought only what was promised her, and then only survival. Silas's expression did not change, but his eyes, when they met Martha Grigsby's, were like chips of winter ice. "This is my property, Mistress Grigsby. And this woman," he gestured towards Ilara, a simple, inclusive movement, "is under my protection. There's nothing unseemly about a man offering shelter to someone in need." "Protection?" Mistress Grigsby sniffed. "Folks are saying otherwise. They're saying you're living in sin. It casts a bad light on decent folk." A muscle twitched in Silas's jaw. He took a slow step forward, and for the first time, Ilara sensed the formidable strength coiled beneath his quiet exterior. "What folks say and what is true are often two different trails, ma'am. Ilara Vance is my concern, not theirs, and not yours." He paused, his voice dropping to a level that brooked no argument. "She's stayin'. If anyone has a problem with that, they can bring it to me directly." Martha Grigsby's face mottled with indignation, but something in Silas's unwavering stance made her bluster falter. She tugged at her reins. "Well, I never. The preacher will hear of this, mark my words." She wheeled her horse around and galloped off, dignity severely ruffled. Ilara looked at Silas, a wave of gratitude so profound it left her breathless. He had defended her, unequivocally, publicly. He had named her, claimed her presence as his concern. He met her gaze, a brief, almost shy acknowledgement, passing between them before he turned back to his work, as if challenging the entire disapproving world and dismissing it in the same gesture. The fragile sanctuary felt a little stronger, a little more like home, because he had declared it so. Jedediah Thorne did not take Silas's quiet defiance well. His pride, already inflated, was pricked by the notion that a broken-down rancher like Silas had dared to offer refuge, and by extension, respect, to the woman Thorne himself had cast aside so contemptuously. His malice, once directed solely at Ilara, now extended to include Silas. It began with petty harassments. A section of Silas's already dilapidated fence was found cut, allowing his few cattle to stray. Whispers in town intensified, fueled by Thorne's sneering suggestions that Silas was either a fool or something worse. Then, the threats escalated. One morning, Silas found a crudely drawn caricature of Ilara nailed to his cabin door, accompanied by a vile message. The air in the small cabin grew thick with unspoken tension. Ilara felt a cold dread creep into her heart, not for herself this time, but for Silas. He had taken her in, protected her, and now he was paying a price. "You should let me go," she said one evening, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "This is because of me. I won't have you harmed on my account." Silas stopped sharpening his knife, the rhythmic rasp of stone on steel ceasing abruptly. He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Harm comes whether you invite it or not, Ilara. Thorne's a bully. Bullies don't stop 'cause you run. They just find another target." He resumed his sharpening, the sound strangely comforting in its normalcy. "Besides," he added almost as an afterthought, "this place, it's been quieter with you here." Better. Her breath caught. Better. He thought her presence made his solitary existence better. It was a simple statement, yet it resonated deep within her, a balm to old wounds. She would not run. They would face this, whatever it was, together. Her resilience, once a flickering ember, began to glow with a new, determined heat. She started taking more initiative, not just with chores, but with watchfulness, her eyes scanning the horizon when Silas was out, her ears alert to any unusual sound. She was no longer just a recipient of shelter, she was becoming a defender of it. The crisis arrived on a moonless night, the sky a black velvet cloth pricked with cold stars. A dog Silas had recently acquired, a scruffy but alert mongrel he'd named Scamp, began to bark furiously from the small corral. Silas was instantly awake, grabbing his old rifle from its pegs by the door. Ilara, her heart pounding, scrambled from the cot, her eyes wide in the darkness. "Stay inside," Silas commanded, his voice a low growl. But as he moved to unbar the door, the acrid smell of smoke reached them, sharp and terrifying. "Fire!" Ilara cried, peering through a crack in the shutters. An orange glow flickered near the small barn, where Silas stored his meager winter hay and tools. Flames were beginning to lick at the dry timber. Thorne. It had to be. This was beyond harassment. This was an attempt to destroy everything Silas had. Silas threw open the door, rifle at the ready. 3 shadowy figures were visible near the barn, one holding a torch aloft. Ilara, ignoring Silas's earlier command, grabbed the heavy iron poker from the hearth. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but a fiercer protectiveness surged through her. This was their home, however humble, and she would not let it burn without a fight. "Thorne! Show yourself, you coward!" Silas roared into the night, his voice echoing across the still land. One of the figures laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Came to collect what's mine, dirt farmer, or rather, rid the territory of your blight and your whore." It was Thorne's voice, thick with arrogance and malice. Before Silas could reply, Ilara stepped out beside him, the poker held like a weapon. Her hair had come loose, framing a face pale but resolute. "You'll find no whores here, Mr. Thorne," she called out, her voice surprisingly steady, carrying clearly in the night air. "Only a decent man you're too cowardly to face in daylight." and a woman who sees you for the empty, cruel shell you truly are." Her words seemed to momentarily stun Thorn and his two companions. In that instant, Silas fired his rifle, not at the men, but into the ground near their feet. Dirt sprayed upwards. "Get off my land now!" One of Thorn's men yelped and scrambled back. The other hesitated. Thorn, however, enraged by Ilara's defiance, raised a pistol. "You'll pay for that, both of you!" But as he aimed, a shout came from the darkness beyond the firelight. "Hold it right there, Thorn!" Two riders emerged, one carrying a lantern that cast swinging shadows. It was Henderson, a neighboring rancher who, though gruff, was known for his fairness, and with him his eldest son. They must have seen the glow of the fire from their own property. Thorn froze, his bravado faltering in the face of unexpected witnesses. Henderson rode closer, his shotgun held loosely but purposefully across his saddle. "What's the meaning of this, Thorn? Setting fires on a man's property? That's low, even for you." "This is none of your concern, Henderson," Thorn blustered, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "This is between me and this squatter." "Silas ain't no squatter. He works this land honest," Henderson retorted, his gaze sharp. He looked from Thorn to Ilara and Silas, standing shoulder to shoulder, then back to the burning barn. "And this woman, she speaks truer than you ever have, Thorn. I've heard the talk, and I've seen how Silas has offered kindness where you offered only cruelty." Another figure appeared then, on foot, breathless. It was Old Man Hemlock, who lived a mile down the creek, drawn by the commotion and the fire. He peered at the scene, his eyes adjusting to the light. "Burning a man out? That ain't right. That ain't the way of decent folk." Thorn looked around, seeing not just Silas and Ilara, but a small, quickly growing group of his neighbors, their faces grim in the flickering firelight. His support had evaporated. His cronies, sensing the shift in tide, began to edge away into the darkness. This isn't over." Thorn snarled, but his threat was hollow. He knew he was beaten, not by force of arms alone, but by the weight of community disapproval, by the simple courage of the two people he had sought to destroy. He lowered his pistol, turned, and disappeared into the night, his companions scurrying after him like rats. The immediate threat was gone. Silas, Henderson, and his son quickly worked to douse the flames engulfing the small barn, Ilara bringing buckets of water from the rain barrel until her arms ached and her breath came in ragged gasps. They saved part of the structure, but much of the hay was lost. Exhaustion settled heavily on them all as the last embers died, leaving a scene of smoky desolation. Henderson clapped Silas on the shoulder. "You did good, Silas. You both did." His gaze included Ilara, a new respect in his eyes. "Thorn won't be bothering you again soon, I reckon. He showed his true colors tonight, and folks saw it." Old Man Hemlock nodded. "We'll help you rebuild, Silas. That's what neighbors are for." As the neighbors departed, promising to return with tools and timber at first light, Ilara and Silas stood alone amidst the charred remains. A profound weariness enveloped Ilara, yet beneath it, a strange sense of triumph. They had faced the worst, and they had not broken. More than that, they had not been alone. Silas finally turned to her, his face smudged with soot, his eyes reflecting a deep, quiet emotion she had never seen there before. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently brushing a streak of grime from her cheek. "You were brave, Ilara." His voice was husky. "Braver than any man I know." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of an emotion too new and overwhelming to name. "We were brave," she corrected softly. He didn't pull his hand away, and she didn't move. The small distance between them felt charged, sacred. The cabin, though humble and now scarred, felt more like home than any place she had ever known. In the days that followed, the community, once a source of judgment, became a source of support. Men arrived with lumber and tools, and the small barn was rebuilt, stronger than before. Women brought pies and loaves of bread, their earlier suspicions replaced by a grudging admiration for Ilara's spirit and Silas's quiet strength. Thorn was notably absent from town, his reputation in tatters. Redstone Gulch, it seemed, had its own rough justice. Life settled into a new rhythm, one marked by shared labor, quiet companionship, and an unspoken, unshakable bond. The small cabin, once a mere shelter, became a true home, filled not with fine things, but with the richness of mutual respect and a slowly blossoming affection. Ilara no longer felt like a castaway. She was an anchor, and Silas was her harbor. She planted a small garden, and bright wildflowers bloomed where only dust had been. Laughter, a sound rarely heard before, sometimes graced their evenings. One cool autumn evening, as they sat by the fire, Silas reached for her hand. His touch was hesitant, yet firm. "Ilara," he began, his voice unusually strained. This ain't how I ever pictured my life again. After Mary and the boy," he paused, searching for words. "But with you here, it's like the sun came out after a long winter." She looked at him, her heart full. "For me too, Silas," she whispered. "You gave me back my hope. You showed me what home truly means." He cleared his throat. "The preacher's coming through next month. Thought maybe, if you were willing, we could make this official. Proper." A slow smile spread across Ilara's face, radiant and genuine. The pain of Jedediah Thorne's betrayal was a distant scar now, no longer a fresh wound. She had arrived in Redstone Gulch beaten and left behind, a victim of cruelty and circumstance. But in the quiet strength of a struggling cowboy, in the shared sanctuary of a humble cabin, she had found not just survival, but resilience, belonging, and a love as steadfast and true as the mountains that watched over them. "Yes, Silas," she said, her voice clear and sure. "I would like that very much." He squeezed her hand, and in that simple gesture, a new future unfurled, bright with the promise of a hard-won, deeply cherished peace. The ranch girl who was lost had found her world, and the struggling cowboy was no longer alone. Together, they had built a life from the ashes of their pasts, a testament to the enduring power of kindness in a harsh land, and the unexpected blossoming of love in the most desolate of places. Their found family was small, just the two of them under a wide prairie sky, but its roots ran deep and its strength was unshakable.